Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I'm a security guard at a warehouse downtown. The job requires me to be sharp and alert during my 12-hour shifts, which means I absolutely need my sleep during the day. I've been doing this for 3 years now, and I've got my routine down pat. I get home around 7 a.m., wind down for an hour, then sleep from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. It works perfectly, or at least it did until 6 months ago when my neighbor got a dog. The guy next door works nights too, but at some factory across town. His shift starts around 11 p.m. and ends at 6 a.m. When he first moved in 2 years ago, we got along fine. We'd nod at each other when we saw each other in the hallway, maybe exchange a few words about the weather. Nothing fancy, but we were good neighbors. Then he got the dog, a big German Shepherd that he named something I never bothered to remember. Beautiful animal, but loud as a freight train. The first few nights I figured it was just adjustment period stuff. New home, new smells, new sounds. The dog would bark a bit here and there, but nothing too crazy. But then it became a routine. Every single night, right at midnight, that dog would start barking. Not just a few woofs either. Deep, booming barks that echoed through the thin walls of our apartment building like he was announcing the apocalypse. The sound would bounce off the concrete walls in the courtyard and amplify until it felt like the dog was inside my bedroom. The barking would go on for hours, sometimes until 2 a.m., sometimes until 3 a.m., never shorter than 2 hours, always starting right at midnight. I tried everything. Earplugs, white noise machines, even sleeping pills. Nothing worked. Those barks cut through everything. After 2 weeks of this torture, I was a zombie at work. I was making mistakes, falling asleep at my desk, and my supervisor was starting to notice. I knew I had to do something, so I went next door. I knocked on his door around 7 p.m. right after I'd gotten up and had some coffee. The neighbor answered looking like he'd just woken up himself. I told him I needed to talk about his dog. I explained that the dog had been barking every night from midnight to 3 a.m. and I couldn't sleep. I mentioned that I work nights too, so I need to sleep during the day. I asked if there was any way he could bring the dog inside during those hours. The guy just shrugged and gave me this annoying smirk. He said the dog was just doing his job. He called it a guard dog and said that's what they do. When I pointed out that there was nothing to guard against at midnight and it was just noise, he told me he wasn't changing his routine for me. He said the dog stays outside and closed the door in my face. I stood there for a minute trying to process what had just happened. The guy didn't even seem sorry about it, just flat out refused to help. I gave it another week, hoping maybe he'd think about it and change his mind. But nope. Every night right at midnight the barking started. I was getting desperate. I even called the landlord, but they said they needed documented complaints and that it could take months to resolve. So I decided to try talking to him one more time. This time I waited until he was leaving for work. I caught him in the hallway around 10:30 p.m. I asked if we could talk about the dog situation again. I told him I was barely getting any sleep. He reminded me that he'd already told me the dog was doing his job and maybe I should get used to it. I pleaded with him to at least try bringing the dog in at night, just during the week. He refused again, saying the dog stays outside, and that was the end of the discussion. The smirk was back and I could tell he was enjoying this. He actually seemed to like the fact that his dog was keeping me awake. That's when I realized I wasn't dealing with a reasonable person. I was dealing with someone who didn't care about anyone but himself. That night I started recording. I set up my phone on the windowsill and let it record for the full 3 hours of barking. The audio was crystal clear. You could hear every single bark, every pause, every echo. It was exactly what I've been dealing with every night. The next morning I went to the electronics store and bought a small but powerful Bluetooth speaker, the kind designed for outdoor use with really good bass. I set it up right against the wall that separated our apartments, the wall where his bedroom was located. At 6:15 a.m., right after I heard him come home and close his door, I pressed play. 3 hours of his own dog barking, played back at full volume. The sound quality was so good, it was like the dog was in his room. I could hear him moving around immediately. Footsteps, what sounded like him banging on the wall. But I just sat there with my coffee, listening to his dog's barking fill his apartment. After about 10 minutes, he started pounding on my door. He demanded to know what I was doing. I told him I was just playing some audio and thought he might like to hear what his dog sounds like. He ordered me to turn it off right now. I reminded him that it was just a dog doing his job like he'd said, and that he told me I should get used to it. He accused me of harassment, so I explained that it was the exact same sound he'd been letting me listen to every night for months, and I was just sharing it back with him. He walked back to his apartment, slamming the door so hard the whole building shook, but I kept the recording playing for the full 3 hours. I figured if I had to listen to it every night, he could listen to it once during the day. The second morning I did it again. Same time, same recording, same volume. This time he didn't even bother coming to my door. I could hear him moving around his apartment, probably trying to sleep with pillows over his head. Welcome to my world. On the third night, something amazing happened. At 11:45 p.m. I heard the neighbor's door open and close, then I heard him calling his dog to come inside. The dog whined a little, but I heard the door close again. Midnight came and went. No barking. 1 a.m., still quiet. 2 a.m., nothing. 3 a.m., complete silence. I slept through the night for the first time in months. It was incredible. The next morning I didn't play the recording. I figured the message had been received. That night, same thing. The dog was brought inside before midnight, and the night after that, and every night since. It's been 3 months now, and I haven't heard a single bark after 10 p.m. The neighbor and I don't talk anymore, but that's fine by me. I'm a single parent, and I work from home doing freelance graphic design. It's tough juggling client deadlines with parenting, but we make it work. My daughter is smart as a whip, maybe too smart for her own good sometimes. When she turned 7, I got her a tablet for educational games and the occasional video when I needed to focus on work. Nothing fancy, just something to keep her occupied and learning. The thing is, I'm pretty careful about screen time. I've seen what happens to kids who get unlimited access to devices, and I didn't want that for her. So I set up parental controls that would automatically shut down all apps except calling and texting after she'd used her allotted time. 2 hours on weekdays, 3 on weekends. Seemed reasonable. For months everything worked perfectly. She'd use her tablet for her educational apps, watch some videos, and when the time was up, she'd go play with her toys or read books. I was pretty proud of my parenting skills, to be honest. Then last week she started complaining that her tablet was running slow. Really slow. I figured it was just getting old. It wasn't the newest model to begin with, but when she handed it to me that morning saying it was completely frozen, I knew something was wrong. I tried turning it on, and it took forever to load. When I finally got to the home screen, there was a notification that the storage was almost full. That was weird. The tablet had 64 gigabytes of storage, and she only had a few educational apps and some downloaded videos for car trips. I went into the settings to check what was taking up all the space. Music, 0.2 gigabytes. Photos, 1.3 gigabytes. Apps, 8.5 gigabytes. All normal. Then I saw it. Messages, 32.7 gigabytes. 32 gigabytes of text messages. I stared at the screen for a full minute trying to process what I was seeing. How does a 7-year-old accumulate 32 gigabytes of text messages? She doesn't even text anyone except me, and our conversations are usually just about snacks and dinner. I opened the messaging app, and that's when I discovered my daughter's masterpiece of creative problem solving. She had been texting herself hundreds of times, but these weren't regular texts. She had somehow figured out how to send herself YouTube video links, and the messaging app was storing all the video data. I scrolled through the conversation thread she created with herself. It was like a carefully curated playlist. She'd sent herself messages about checking out videos of pandas, funny animal clips, tutorials on drawing cats, and cool science experiments. The timestamps showed she'd been doing this for weeks, always after her screen time limit kicked in. The messaging app would still work because it wasn't restricted, and somehow she figured out that if she sent herself YouTube links, she could watch the videos through the messaging app even after everything else was shut down. I called her over to explain what I'd found. I asked her to come over for a minute, and she walked over in her pajamas, looking completely innocent. I told her I'd found something interesting on her tablet and asked if she wanted to explain it to me. I showed her the screen with all the text messages. She looked at it and simply said that was what she'd been doing. I asked her how she'd figured out how to do this. She explained that I'd told her she could only use the tablet for 2 hours, but texting didn't count as screen time, right? So she'd found a way to watch videos in the texting app. I had to give her credit for the logic. Technically, she was following the rules I'd set. I'd said she could use the tablet for 2 hours, and after that, only calling and texting would work. She found a loophole and exploited it like a tiny hacker. I asked her how long she'd been doing this. She told me she'd started since I put the timer controls on. She really wanted to watch more videos, but she didn't want to break the rules. I asked her how exactly she'd figured out how to send herself YouTube links. She explained that she'd copied the links from the YouTube app before it shut down, then pasted them in messages. The videos would play in the message window. I was impressed and frustrated at the same time. She'd essentially jailbroken her own device using nothing but creativity and determination. I asked if she knew why her tablet was so slow now. She wondered if it was because she'd watched too many videos. I explained that all those videos were taking up space on her tablet, 32 gigabytes worth. She asked if that was bad, and I told her it was like filling up her backpack with rocks until she couldn't carry it anymore. She looked genuinely concerned and apologized, saying she didn't mean to break it. I reassured her that she hadn't broken it, but we needed to clean it up and talk about new rules. I spent the next hour deleting all the cached video data from her messages while she watched nervously. When I was done, the tablet was back to normal speed. I told her that I wasn't actually mad about what she'd done because she technically followed the rules, but now I was making new rules. She asked what kind of rules I meant. I explained that the messaging app would also get shut down after screen time was over, and if she wanted to watch more videos, she could ask me instead of finding sneaky ways around the rules. She asked if she could request extra time if she finished her homework early. I told her we could talk about earning extra time, and she asked if she could still text me when I was working. I assured her that of course she could, but no more texting herself videos. She agreed to the deal. I updated the parental controls to include the messaging app, but I also created a system where she could earn extra screen time for good behavior, finished homework, or helping around the house. The next day, she came to me with a hand-drawn chart showing all her completed chores and asked if she could have 30 extra minutes of tablet time. She'd channeled that same problem-solving energy into something constructive. A week later, I was telling this story to my friend who works in IT security. He laughed so hard he nearly choked on his coffee. He told me that my 7-year-old had basically performed a social engineering attack on my parental controls. I should be proud and terrified at the same time. I told him I was definitely both. He asked if I'd considered getting her into coding classes. I joked that I was scared of what she might hack next. But honestly, I was proud. She'd identified a problem, found a creative solution, and implemented it without breaking any of the explicit rules I'd set. Sure, it caused some technical issues, but the ingenuity was impressive. Now when people ask me about parenting in the digital age, I tell them this story. Kids are smarter than we give them credit for, and they'll always find ways around our restrictions if they're determined enough. The key is channeling that creativity in positive directions and staying one step ahead of their problem-solving skills. Though I'm definitely investing in better parental control software and maybe some coding classes. I'm a single dad to my 3-year-old son. His mom passed away when he was just 8 months old in a car accident, so it's been just us two ever since. I work 2 jobs to make ends meet. I'm a night shift warehouse worker, and I do food delivery on weekends. Money's always tight, but I try to give my little guy the best childhood I can manage. We don't get many chances for fun outings because of my work schedule and our budget, but last Saturday was special. I'd saved up some extra cash from tips, and my son had been begging to go to the traveling fair that's set up in our town for the week. He'd been talking about the Ferris wheel nonstop since we drove past it earlier that week. The way his eyes lit up when he saw those colorful lights spinning in the distance, I knew I had to make it happen. So there we were, standing in line for the Ferris wheel around 7 p.m. My son was bouncing with excitement, pointing at the wheel and chattering about how high we were going to go. I was tired from working a double shift the night before, but seeing him so happy made it all worth it. The line wasn't too long, maybe 15 people ahead of us, and I was looking forward to having this quiet moment with him up in the air, away from all the noise and chaos below. That's when she showed up. This woman came storming over with a little girl who looked maybe 5 or 6 years old. The kid was clearly upset, tears streaming down her face, but the woman looked more annoyed than concerned. She walked right up to me, completely ignoring the fact that there were other people in line ahead of us. She demanded that I let them ride with us. She explained that her daughter was scared to ride alone and she couldn't fit in those tiny carts by herself. She told me that my kid and I could share the cart with them. I looked at the Ferris wheel carts and pointed out that they were designed for 2 adults or 1 adult with a small child, maybe 2 small children at most. 4 people would definitely be cramped and probably unsafe. She dismissed my concerns and called my objection ridiculous. She claimed there was plenty of room and that her daughter needed this. She demanded that I help them out. Her daughter was still crying and honestly, I felt bad for the kid. But something about this woman's demanding tone rubbed me the wrong way. I looked around hoping someone else might step in, but everyone seemed to be avoiding eye contact. I tried to suggest that she should talk to the operator about finding another solution, but she cut me off. She told me that she was not waiting in line again and said that we were riding together, whether I liked it or not. The operator, a teenager who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, came over to see what the commotion was about. He asked if there was a problem. The woman told him that I was being difficult and explained that she needed to ride with me because her daughter wouldn't go alone. The operator looked at me with this helpless expression. I could tell he didn't want to deal with the drama, and honestly, neither did I. My son was starting to look confused and a little scared by all the shouting. I agreed that we could share the cart. I regret those words more than anything. The operator helped us all squeeze into the cart, and it was immediately obvious this was a terrible idea. The space was cramped and Karen kept shifting around, making the whole cart rock. Her daughter was still sniffling, and my son had gone quiet, which usually meant he was getting overwhelmed. When the wheel started to move, I tried to point out things to my son to distract him from the tense atmosphere. But Karen wouldn't stop complaining about how ridiculous the situation was and how small and unsafe the carts were. I suggested that maybe we should just try to enjoy the ride, but she snapped back and told me not to tell her what to do. Then she asked why I was looking at her like that. I told her I wasn't looking at her any particular way and that I was just trying to make the best of things. But she accused me of smirking and said she could see me judging her. I honestly had no idea what she was talking about. I was looking out at the view, trying to show my son the lights of the town below us, but she kept going, telling me that I thought I was better than her just because she needed help with her daughter. Her own daughter was getting more upset by her mother's raised voice, and my son was starting to whimper. We were about halfway up the wheel at this point, and I just wanted this ride to be over. I tried to tell her I wasn't judging anyone and asked if we could please just calm down, but she said that I was judging her and that she could see it in my face. That's when we reached the top. The cart swayed gently as it paused, giving us a view of the whole fairground below. It should have been magical. Instead, Karen completely lost it. She told me that she was sick of people like me, thinking we were so perfect. Before I could even process what was happening, she lunged at me. Not a slap or a shove, she literally tried to push me out of the cart. Her hands were on my chest, shoving with surprising force, and suddenly I was tilting backward toward the opening. The only thing that saved me was grabbing the safety rail with both hands. The cart was rocking violently now, and both kids were screaming. My son was reaching for me, crying for his daddy over and over. I asked her what she was doing and begged her to stop, but she kept yelling at me to get out. She kept pushing, but I held on tight to that rail. The cart was swaying so much I thought we might actually tip over. Her daughter was sobbing and screaming for her mom to stop, I managed to pull myself back into the seat, but she didn't stop there. She kept trying to shove me, and I had to use one arm to hold my son close while keeping my other hand on the rail. I yelled that she was going to kill us all and pleaded with her to stop. That's when the Ferris wheel suddenly stopped moving. The operator must have noticed something was wrong because our cart was rocking back and forth like crazy. We were stuck at the top for what felt like forever, while Karen continued trying to push me. The wheel started moving again, bringing us down slowly. By the time we reached the bottom, there were police officers waiting. People in the other carts had seen everything and called 911. One of the officers asked if I was all right. I told him that she had tried to push me out of the cart with my son right there. Karen immediately protested, claiming that wasn't what happened. She said that I had been threatening her and that she was defending herself. But the witnesses told a completely different story. Multiple people had watched the whole thing happen. They saw her attack me unprovoked while I was just trying to protect my child. Another officer explained to Karen that they had several witnesses who saw her assault me while the ride was in motion. She said they were all lying and that I had been aggressive. The first officer asked if I wanted to press charges. I looked at my son, who was still clinging to me and shaking. I thought about what could have happened if I hadn't held on tight enough. What could have happened to him if I'd fallen? I told them yes, I wanted to press charges. They arrested her right there in front of everyone, and she kept screaming about how unfair it was, how I was the real problem, how her daughter needed her. But the evidence was clear. Her daughter ended up going home with someone else. I think it was her grandmother who came to pick her up. That poor kid looked traumatized, and I felt awful for her. None of this was her fault. My son didn't talk much on the ride home. When I tucked him into bed that night, he asked me why the lady tried to hurt me. I explained to him that sometimes people get scared or angry and they make bad choices. I told him that he saw how Daddy stayed strong and kept us safe. He said that I held on really tight. I agreed and promised him that I would always hold on tight to keep him safe. The police called me a few days later to let me know Karen was being charged with assault and reckless endangerment. This wasn't her first incident like this. She had a history of aggressive behavior in public places. I keep thinking about what could have happened if I'd lost my grip, if we'd both fallen, if my son had been hurt because of her tantrum. It makes me sick to my stomach, but I'm also proud that I stood my ground, that I protected my child and myself, that I didn't let her get away with it just because she was having a bad day or whatever her excuse was. My son hasn't asked to go back to the fair, and honestly, I'm not ready either, but I know we'll get there eventually. I won't let one person's terrible behavior rob us of experiences we should be able to enjoy together. My wife lost her father when she was only 9 years old. It was devastating for her and her mom. They were really close as a family, and losing him left a huge hole in their lives. For 6 years, it was just the two of them figuring things out together. When my wife turned 15, her mom met someone new. His name is David, and he seemed nice enough at first. Her mom was lonely, and David made her happy, so my wife tried to be supportive. But problems started almost immediately after they got married. David had this idea that he could just step in and become my wife's new dad. He tried to enforce rules, give her curfews, and act like he had authority over her. My wife made it crystal clear from day one that wasn't happening. She already had a dad, and even though he was gone, no one was going to replace him. Her mom backed her up on this, which was good. They sat David down and explained that while he was welcome in their family, he wasn't going to be my wife's father figure. He could be a friend, a mentor, maybe even a parental figure in some ways, but never her dad. He reluctantly agreed, though you could tell he wasn't happy about it. Over the years, David and my wife have had an uneasy relationship. He's constantly trying to overstep boundaries, and she's constantly having to remind him of his place. It's exhausting to watch, honestly. I've tried to stay out of it mostly, but it's clear that David has never fully accepted the boundaries they set. When my wife and I got engaged, David tried to insert himself into wedding planning. He wanted to walk her down the aisle, which was absolutely not happening. My wife had already decided she was walking alone to honor her father's memory. David threw a fit about that too, claiming he deserved the honor, since he'd been there for her for over a decade. The wedding day itself was tense. David kept making comments about how he should have been included more, how he felt like an outsider at his own stepdaughter's wedding. My wife handled it with grace, but I could see how much it bothered her. Now, a week ago, our son was born. He is the first grandchild on both sides of the family, so everyone is excited and trying to figure out what they want to be called. My parents settled on the traditional grandma and grandpa pretty quickly. My wife's mom wants to be called Nana, which is sweet, but David had other plans. The conversation happened when we were still in the hospital. Everyone had come to meet the baby, and somehow the topic of grandparent names came up. David announced that he'd been thinking about what he wanted the baby to call him. When my wife asked what he had in mind, he said he wanted to be called Avi. My wife asked what that meant, and David explained that it means father in Hebrew and that he thought it was perfect. The room went completely silent. My wife's face went white, and I could see her jaw clench. I knew this wasn't going to go well. My wife immediately said absolutely not. David seemed confused and asked what she meant. She explained that she couldn't believe he wanted her son to call him father, asking if he was serious. David tried to brush it off, saying it was just a name and that he wasn't trying to replace anyone. My wife shot back that this was exactly what he'd been trying to do for 12 years, and now he wanted to be called father by her son. David argued that it was Hebrew, not English, so it was different. My wife told him the language didn't matter, the meaning did. I jumped in at this point because I could see things escalating. I suggested to David that maybe we could find a different name, something that didn't have that particular meaning. David got defensive and asked what I meant, like grandpa, because my wife had made it clear that her real grandfather wasn't there anymore, so he guessed he wasn't good enough for that title either. My wife tried to explain that this wasn't what it was about, and David knew it. He accused her of spending years making sure he knew he wasn't her father, and now she wouldn't even let him be called something that remotely resembled a grandfather. My wife told him he could be called grandpa if he wanted, but he couldn't be called father in any language. David said he didn't want to be called grandpa, and that he wanted something that was his, something special. My wife suggested he pick something else then. Pop, papa, granddad. Anything but something that means father. David accused her of planning to shoot down anything he suggested. My wife said she would if he suggested something inappropriate. David then suggested Saba, which he said was grandfather in Hebrew. My wife said that was better and she could live with that. But David immediately changed his mind, saying forget it, he didn't want it anymore if she was just going to approve it out of pity. My wife tried to explain she wasn't doing it out of pity and was trying to find something they could all be comfortable with. David complained that he wasn't comfortable with any of this and that she'd made it impossible for him to have any kind of meaningful relationship with the child. My wife asked how asking him not to be called father made it impossible for him to have a relationship with the baby. David said it was because everything had to be on her terms and he couldn't be the child's grandfather in the way he wanted to be. My wife pointed out that being a grandfather wasn't about what you're called, but about the relationship you build. David said that was easy for her to say since she didn't have to deal with constant rejection. My wife seemed shocked and asked about constant rejection, pointing out that she'd included him in everything. She'd invited him to be in the delivery room, asked for his input on baby names, and never tried to exclude him. David said she excluded him from anything that mattered. My wife explained that this mattered to her too, that this was her son and she got to decide what was appropriate. David complained that he didn't get a say in anything. My wife told him he got a say in reasonable things, but wanting to be called father was not reasonable. The argument continued for another 10 minutes before my wife's mom finally intervened and suggested everyone take a break. David walked out and started complaining about how nothing he does is ever good enough. Later that day, David sent my wife a long text message about how hurt he was and how he felt like she was punishing him for trying to be part of the family. He said he was tired of being treated like an outsider and that maybe he should just step back from the whole situation. My wife showed me the text, and I could see how much it was affecting her. She's exhausted from giving birth, hormonal, and trying to bond with our new baby. The last thing she needs is David's drama. I told her she knew she wasn't being unreasonable. She agreed but wondered if maybe she was being too harsh and should just let him be called Avi. I told her absolutely not, that she'd set a boundary and it was a reasonable one and she shouldn't let him guilt her into changing her mind. She said she just wanted everyone to be happy. I pointed out that everyone except David was happy, and David was never going to be happy unless he got exactly what he wanted, which was to be her dad. She agreed and said she just hated all the conflict. I told her I understood, but she was protecting her son and honoring her father's memory, and that's what mattered. The next day, David called and sort of apologized. He said he was sorry for getting upset the day before and that he just wanted to be a good grandfather. My wife told him she appreciated that and wanted him to be a great grandfather too. David then asked if they could compromise on the name. When my wife asked what kind of compromise, he suggested Abba, saying it was another Hebrew word for father, but more informal. My wife reminded him they'd been over this and told him no, nothing that means father. David then suggested Dada. My wife asked if he was serious. David said what was wrong with it, it didn't mean father. My wife pointed out that it's what babies call their fathers. David argued that not all babies do that. My wife told him to stop, that he was being ridiculous. David accused her of being ridiculous and said she wouldn't let him be called anything he wanted. My wife reminded him that she'd told him he could be called grandpa, granddad, pop, papa, or any number of normal grandfather names. David said he didn't want a normal name, he wanted something special. My wife told him to pick something special that didn't mean father or daddy. When David asked like what, she told him to use his imagination. David then suggested Zaid, explaining it was Yiddish for grandfather. My wife said that was fine with her. David seemed surprised and asked if she really meant it. She confirmed that Zaid was perfect. David said he guessed that worked, but it didn't end there. 2 days later, David called again. He told my wife he'd been thinking about the name thing again. When she asked what about it, he said he didn't really like Zaid, and it didn't feel right. My wife told him to pick something else then. David said he still thought Avi was the best choice. My wife reminded him they'd been through this and the answer was no. David accused her of being unfair. When she asked how she was being unfair, he said she got to veto anything he suggested, but he didn't get any input on what he was called. My wife explained that he had input, he just didn't get to choose something inappropriate. David asked according to who? My wife said according to her because she was the baby's mother. David pointed out that he was going to be the grandfather. My wife told him to act like it, instead of trying to be the father. David denied that's what he was doing. My wife said that was exactly what he was doing. The conversation went in circles for another 10 minutes before my wife finally hung up on him. She was crying by the end of it, and I was furious. I decided to call David myself. I told him we needed to talk. He asked about what? I said about his behavior toward my wife. He claimed he wasn't doing anything wrong. I explained that he was harassing her about a name she'd already said no to multiple times. He said he was trying to find a solution that worked for everyone. I told him the solution was for him to pick a normal grandfather name and move on. David asked why he should have to settle. I explained it wasn't about him, it was about our son and what we were comfortable with. David said he had rights too. I asked what rights? The right to be called father by someone else's child. David said the right to be respected as a family member. I told him respect goes both ways, and he needed to respect our boundaries. David claimed he'd been respecting boundaries for 12 years. I corrected him, saying he'd been pushing against them for 12 years. He said he'd been trying to be part of the family. I acknowledged that he was part of the family, but he wasn't my wife's father, and he wasn't going to be our son's father either. David said he never said he wanted to be the baby's father. I pointed out that he wanted the child to call him father, which was the same thing. David said it was just a name. I told him if it was just a name, then he should pick a different one. David finally agreed he'd be Grandpa David. I said that was perfect. David complained that he wasn't happy about it. I told him I didn't care if he was happy about it. I cared that he stopped bothering my wife while she was trying to recover from childbirth. David said I couldn't control who he talked to. I explained that I could control who came to my house and who got to spend time with my son. David asked if I was threatening him. I said I was setting a boundary. If he couldn't respect our decisions about our child, then he wouldn't be part of the baby's life. David said I wouldn't do that. I told him to try me. There was a long pause before David spoke again and said, "Fine, he'd be Grandpa David." I told him good, and then added that if he brought this up again, we were done. David said he understood. It's been 3 days since that conversation, and David hasn't called or texted. My wife's mom says he's been sulking, but she also thinks he finally got the message. We'll see. I'm a widowed mom of 2 teenagers. My husband passed away 3 years ago from cancer, and since then I've been juggling everything on my own. On top of raising my kids, I also care for my elderly parents who live with us. My dad has dementia and my mom has mobility issues, so they need constant supervision. It's exhausting, but it's my family, and I wouldn't have it any other way. Last week, I developed what my doctor called a rare internal infection. The good news was that it's completely treatable with antibiotics. The bad news was that this particular antibiotic is notorious for making people violently ill. We're talking non-stop nausea, vomiting, and basically feeling like death warmed over. My doctor warned me about the side effects but said there was no alternative medication that would work. Since I'm the sole caregiver for my parents and my kids still need me, I couldn't exactly take time off to recover. I had to push through the sickness and keep going with my daily routine. My nephew, who's in college nearby, offered to help me with grocery shopping since I was feeling so awful. We went to Walmart because it was the most convenient option. I thought I could handle a quick shopping trip, but about halfway through, the medication hit me like a freight train. The nausea was overwhelming and I knew I was about to be sick. I told my nephew I had to find a bathroom immediately. I rushed to the public restroom, barely making it to a stall before everything came up. It was horrible, not just the physical discomfort, but the embarrassment of being sick in a public place. I was trying to be quiet, but when you're that sick, there's only so much you can do to muffle the sounds. There were only 2 other people in the bathroom, a woman and what sounded like her daughter, probably around 11 or 12 years old. When I started throwing up, the mother began talking loudly to her daughter. The woman started telling her daughter that this was exactly why she shouldn't grow up to be trashed like some people. She went on about how some people party all night on Friday and then come out hungover on Saturday morning, calling it disgusting. I could hear her clearly through the stall door. She wasn't even trying to be discreet about her comments. The woman kept going, telling her daughter that people like me shouldn't be allowed out in public when we're in this condition. She said if someone was going to get that drunk and puke everywhere, they should stay home. Her daughter didn't respond, but the woman kept making her cruel comments. I was mortified. Here I was, genuinely sick from medication I needed to take to get better, and this woman was making these awful assumptions about me. Under normal circumstances, I would have immediately explained the situation and apologized for any discomfort I was causing. But I was too sick to speak, and honestly, her comments were so cruel that I was getting angry. The worst part was that they finished using the bathroom long before I did. But instead of leaving, they stood by the sinks, continuing to make these judgmental comments. I could hear them washing their hands and primping in the mirror, while the woman kept up her commentary. She said she bet I had kids at home too, and told her daughter to imagine having a mother like me. Then she went on about how this was what happened when people had no self-control or respect for others. I was getting sicker by the minute, but I was also getting angrier. This woman was teaching her daughter to be judgmental and cruel towards strangers without knowing anything about their situation. It was infuriating. Finally, after what felt like forever, I managed to pull myself together enough to leave the stall. I was pale, shaky, and felt terrible, but I was also done with this woman's attitude. When I walked toward the sinks where they were still standing, I looked directly at her. I told her that just so she knew I wasn't drunk. I said I had norovirus. The lie came out before I could stop myself. I was so angry at her assumptions and her nasty comments that I wanted to make her as uncomfortable as she had made me. Norovirus is highly contagious, and I knew that would get her attention. Then, partly out of spite and partly because I couldn't help it, I coughed in their direction. It wasn't a deliberate attempt to spread germs. I was genuinely having a coughing fit from all the vomiting, but the timing couldn't have been more perfect. Her eyes went wide and she grabbed her daughter's arm. She started panicking, saying, "Oh my God," and telling her daughter they needed to leave right now. They literally ran out of the bathroom, the woman pulling her daughter behind her while talking about calling the health department and how people with contagious diseases shouldn't be allowed in public places. I stood there for a moment, still feeling awful but also oddly satisfied. Part of me felt bad about lying about having norovirus, but the bigger part of me felt like she deserved it after the way she had treated me. My nephew was waiting outside the bathroom, looking worried. He helped me finish the shopping trip and get home safely. Later that evening, when I was feeling a bit better, I told him what had happened in the bathroom. He laughed and said the woman got exactly what she deserved for being so judgmental. He pointed out that even if I had been drunk, her behavior was still completely inappropriate. You never know what someone else is going through, and making cruel comments about strangers in public is never okay. The whole experience reminded me how quick people are to judge others without knowing the full story. I was dealing with a serious health issue, trying to care for my family, and doing my best to manage an impossible situation. But this woman saw someone being sick in a public bathroom and immediately assumed the worst. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.